Well, inshallah, today we want to talk about the influence that this. Inshallah, today we'll talk about the influence that this movement has today, and in particular, I'm going to stress the situation in the United States. Why? Stress the situation in the United States because that's the notes that I have prepared. Inshallah, that's what I'm going to discuss. Well, next time, inshallah, we begin a critique of the modernist movement, يعني العصرانية في الميزان, and discuss يعني what is good or what is wrong or what is bad about this movement. Well, the critique will take actually more than one lecture, because there are, and in general, whether we're talking about al-Asraniya or talking about any field, even and not fields not specifically related to Islam, there are basically four sources of mistakes in any field. The first source is when the person does not have the intention to reach the correct solution. And in other words, he has the incorrect intention. His intention is not to find the truth, but it is to find something else. Well, as I mentioned last time, there were some opening points that I mentioned last time that are rather important to keep in mind. And as I mentioned last time, I'm not going to talk about the intention of anyone who I might mention. In fact, in some cases, as we discussed last time, sometimes the intention of the person is very good, but what he does actually is destructive. So the first reason that may lead a person to an incorrect conclusion is if his intention is not sincere. Well, this, inshallah, we will not discuss that point with respect to the modernists. The second reason is when the premises or the fundamental assumptions or the philosophy that someone is believing in is wrong. And if the fundamental assumptions or every science has its own philosophy. If the philosophy behind the science is wrong, also you'll get to the wrong conclusion. So Al-Asraniya movement, actually they have specific premises or specific assumptions that they make. And inshallah we'll have to discuss these assumptions to see whether or not they are correct or not. If the premises or if the fundamental assumptions or the philosophy is wrong, then also the conclusions will be most likely wrong. Third, the methodology might be wrong. And even if the assumptions are correct, the methodology by which you go to solve a problem or find an answer to something might be wrong. So after discussing their fundamental assumptions, we'll then discuss their methodology. And the last reason by which people might come to the wrong conclusion is when they are ignorant of the specific evidence or the specific details of something. And also with respect to Al-Asraniya, that is also the case. That sometimes they will make statements in which, at least it seems, Allah Alam, that they are ignorant of some points which are related to that question that they are discussing. So this critique of the modernist thinking, as I said, it will take actually more than one lecture because we'll be covering all of these different areas. And after that will come a comparison of the Asraniya movement with the beliefs or with the position of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. The two groups will be compared. And then finally we'll discuss the danger of this movement, why we should be aware of this movement, and what this movement might lead to. Last time we discussed the history of the movement, and just to give some conclusions that we made last time. First of all, we said that in fact this is not a new movement. This is in fact a very old movement, and it has its roots even in something before Islam. The real roots of this movement, the modernist movement, is really in the Greek rationalism, or al-Aqlaniyya of the Greek philosophers. And this thinking, this Greek philosophy, was developed within the Islamic framework by the group known as the Mu'tazila. And we discussed last time how the Mu'tazila gave an Islamic flavoring to some of the Greek thoughts. And this modernist movement actually is really bringing up the same kind of thinking once again. And also we mentioned last time that it is in fact, again, it is the Muslims responding to something of a foreign culture. And trying to respond to something which is foreign to Islam by trying to bring it into Islam. And we mentioned that this happened before, when the Muslims first encountered the Greek works and European society. And then it happened again at the turn of this century and before the turn of this century. And we discussed the development of the modernist thinking in Judaism, in Christianity, and also in Islam. And we gave some of the fatwa, some of the points or reasons, some of the conclusions or some of the ideas of some of the founders of the modern Asraniya movement, such as Sir Sayyid Ahmed Khan, Muhammad Abdu, and others of that nature. And we discussed them last time. Nowadays in the Muslim world, and the students of these founders, the second or the third generation of Asraniyin are appearing and are becoming more and more influential among the Muslim Ummah. There might be some differences in conclusions and in minor details between this group that exists now and the original founders of this movement, but their way of thinking or their methodology and their fundamental assumptions, in fact, are the same as what we found in the last century that we discussed last time. And one of the things that may lead to an increase in the influence of this movement has to do with what happened recently in some parts of the Muslim world. For example, the fighting between Iraq and the United States. And this led some people to come to the conclusion that the United States is not an enemy of Islam. And this idea we have to be very careful about. Because the minute you forget that the kuffar are your enemies, then you might start thinking that, okay, they are not our enemies. Maybe they are our friends, and therefore we can take advice from them. We can look to their way of life, and we can start to borrow from them. And this way of thinking, as I said, is very dangerous. And we found it especially right after the war, right after the Americans defeated Iraq. And we find many people talking, many brothers, talking about actually how America came to the aid of the Muslims. And this is something we have to correct this from the beginning. America will never come to the aid of the Muslims unless it is in their own interest. They came to the aid of a certain people because that was in their interest. They are not coming to help Islam. But some people begin to forget about this point. And even this more recent movement concerning the peace, having peace with Israel and having a peace agreement with Israel. And also this is kind of the same kind of thing. Israel before, 20, 30 years ago, you cannot imagine that the Arabs will come down and say that, okay, maybe Israel will accept their existence and will come to a peace agreement. Because at that time they said, and they realized that Israel is the enemy of Islam and it is the enemy of the Arabs. But this idea is spreading that, in fact, maybe the West isn't so bad. Maybe they are not really our enemies. Maybe we can work with them. And this is what has led to this this recent movement to have a peace settlement with Israel. You find in lots of the recent literature, as I said, you find this kind of thinking that the West isn't that bad, or maybe we can look to the West. For example, the May 15th through 21st, 1991 issue of the magazine, Majallat al-Majalla, it was filled with this kind of thinking, this kind of nonsense. One of the writers, Muhammad Amara, he wrote that al-Hadarat al-Gharbiya laysat kufran. Al-Hadarat al-Gharbiya, the Western civilization. And he didn't say Western technology. Okay, technology maybe you can say, although economists good economists will dispute you that technology is value-free or hasn't any relationship to the civilization. But when you say the civilization, to say that the Western civilization is not kufr, this is in fact a big statement, because if you look at what Western civilization is all about, actually it is based on the fact that God has nothing to do with this world. If you want to believe in God, that's fine with you. That's fine. If you want to worship God, okay, go to the mosque and worship God. But God has nothing to do really with guiding us in our affairs. This is what Western civilization is about. Denial of the role of the Lord in everyday living. Besides that, also individualism and other aspects. Actually, in fact, all of Western civilization is just kufr. But to this way of thinking, and put in this magazine, and as I said, the whole magazine was of this nature. it is showing us that once again, unfortunately once again, like what happened during the time of the Mu'tazila, what happened during the time of Muhammad Abdu, once again we're being fooled by outward things, and we're not seeing the reality of things. We're not seeing the reality of the West. And when we get to this position, when we say that the Western civilization is not kufr, then this means it's okay for us to take whatever we want from Western civilization. In the same Mujalla, the same issue, Muhammad al-Ghazali praised the Western society, and he said it is the most advanced civilization. And it is the most advanced civilization. Again, we have to ask ourselves, how do we judge a civilization? Just on the basis of GNP, gross national product, just on the basis of economic issues? A civilization that doesn't really believe in God, and a civilization which is Almani, a Muslim writer, and a respected scholar, is going to say this is the most advanced civilization there ever was. And as I said, this kind of thinking, unfortunately, it is spreading throughout the Muslim world. And when you talk to some brothers, you can see it. And we have to understand what is the basis for this way of thinking, and what is the methodology of this way of thinking, what are the conclusions that this way of thinking will lead us to. And even some of the Muslim movements and many of the leading scholars, when you go to, for example, different conventions, even here in the United States, you feel, you can hear in their speeches that they're being affected by this Asraniya movement, or actually it is a type of taghrib or westernization. For example, Hassan Turabi, well, inshallah, next time I will quote Hassan Turabi in some detail. Today, inshallah, I will not. Even Rashid al-Ghanoushi. Rashid al-Ghanoushi in the early 70s, he wrote some excellent articles about Western civilization and how the West has entered the Muslim lands and has created an elite or a group of people who are ruling the Muslims who have nothing to do with Muslim society and have nothing to do with Muslim culture. That was in the early 70s. More recently, he said in one speech, he said, "Nuridu Islaman Amrikiyan." We want an American Islam. Well, in another lecture, he said that the United States is much more Islamic than any of the Muslim countries, or any of the Muslim areas, he said. To look at the West in this way, to look in the West in this fashion, this is something that will lead to actually what the Asraniya movement wants. The Asraniya movement basically is saying that look at the situation now, look at the West for one thing, or look at the world as a whole. The world as a whole has changed, and therefore we have to change Islam to meet the changes that to make Islam advance, to make Islam civilized. You can actually hear them say that. They're not talking about Muslims, and if you say that about Muslims, maybe you can say that depending, of course, on what you mean. But they're saying we have to make Islam civilized. They're calling for tajdeed or changing of Islam, making a new Islam. And as I said, unfortunately, many scholars today, and much of the media, for example, Sharq al-Awsat, many of their writers who I'll quote next time, such as Fahmi al-Huwaidi and Muhammad Ammar and Muhammad al-Awa, who I'll quote, as I said, next time, inshallah, in some detail. They also are spreading this kind of idea. Also, Muhammad al-Ghazali, and recently also Yusuf al-Qaradawi. Yusuf al-Qaradawi is showing many of these traits in his recent lectures. And on this point, by the way, I disagree with Sheikh Salman Ouda. Salman Ouda, in his book on al-Ghazali, he said that these are the characteristics of the movement, and he brought about, 10 or 15 characteristics. And he said that al-Ghazali has some of them, and al-Ghazali doesn't have some of them. It's not necessary for someone to be Asrani to have all of these characteristics. The only thing is you take the definition of Asrani, which is that the Islam or the religion, whether it is Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, as we talked about last time, the idea is that Islam or the religion has to change because of changing things, because of changing society. And there's no eternal truths in the religion. Everything is relative. What was true during the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, whether it is the Qur'an or Hadith, is no longer true today. If someone has this approach, and you see it in his writings, then he is Asrani, whether or not he agrees with everything that the Asraniya movement, some of their leaders have stated or not. And that's the situation that we see, unfortunately, throughout the Muslim world. Well, as I said, inshallah, today I'm not going to discuss the Muslim world as a whole, but I want to concentrate on the United States. So you have some idea of what is going on in the United States, inshallah. Because I'm sure that most of you are familiar with what is going on in the rest of the Muslim world, but some of you, unfortunately, may not be that familiar with exactly what is going on in the United States. First of all, if you remember, last time I mentioned that Jewish modernism, or the Asraniya movement among the Jews, it began in Germany and in Europe, but it did not really spread very much. But when it came to the United States, this is where it found its new home, and it spread quite quickly. And there were some reasons for that, and we discussed those reasons last time. Similar is the case with the Asraniya movement among the Muslims. It is probably much stronger and much more dominant here in the United States than anywhere else in the Muslim world. And there are a number of reasons for that. بحثني يا شيخ. طيب inshallah, if you leave me your address, I can send you something. He wants me to change the whole topic to me. I realize the importance of what you're saying. One of the reasons that the Asraniya movement is able to spread so much in the United States is, first of all, we do not really have many scholars or many qualified scholars to refute them. And if someone comes new to Islam, doesn't really have much of an idea about Islam, if someone comes to him with a brand of Islam and he trusts that person, he will follow it. If he sees some nice publication, looks nice, and the pictures are nice, the printing is nice, not like Al-Bashir, Al-Bashir, as Facebook calls it. And if he finds something like that, he will believe in it. And if above that, those established Islamic organizations even promote these things or promote these people who have these ideas, and he will believe in it. And we do not have the scholars, at least the number of scholars that we need, who have the knowledge to refute some of the arguments and some of the claims of the Asraniya movement. And worse than that, unfortunately, is that even those scholars who have the knowledge, some of them who I've talked to, they have the idea that for the sake of da'wah, we don't want to confuse them, we don't want to make the issue worse. For the sake of da'wah, let them work, and we don't want to criticize each other. And this actually is wrong, because as we'll see, by the time we finish this whole thing about the Nasraniya, they are calling to something which is maybe close to being outside of Islam. And if you take their conclusions, if you take their arguments to their logical conclusions, as unfortunately some Americans have done when they become Muslim, they take the Asraniya arguments and they take them to their logical conclusions, which is beyond what the Asraniya themselves do, they come to a situation where in fact Islam is nothing. So they either leave Islam or they have an Islam which doesn't mean anything. And unfortunately you'll see this a lot among the Americans. Another reason, from visiting some of the mosques where this movement is popular, it seems that another reason why this Asraniya movement is strong in the United States is that it allows the Muslims from overseas to enter completely into American society and not be distinguished from Americans at all. The Asraniya movement is such as you'll see when we discuss some of their arguments, and even now when I present some things, you'll see that in fact you can be Asrani, you can be just like any American out there. No problem with it. So it allows the immigrants who want to remain Muslim, they want to say, I'm Muslim, I want to pray 5 times a day, but I don't want to be identified as a Muslim, I don't want to be seen as a Muslim, I don't want really to practice the harsh things as a Muslim. And this movement, or this madhab allows him, at least he thinks, to remain Muslim, by following the conclusions of these scholars. And also at the same time, the American who embraces Islam also, it doesn't have to change. He doesn't have to change. He can say, I'm Muslim now, and he doesn't change. As one of the Asrani leaders nowadays. Actually, 3 of them wrote the book together. Fatih Uthman and Mahr Hathout and his brother, I think his name is Hassan Hathout. Hassan Hathout. They wrote a book about in fraternity with our American brothers. He said, when anyone talking about their center, which is one of the leading centers of the Asraniya movement, which is the Islamic Center of Southern California. They said, when anyone comes to us and embraces Islam, we don't ask them to change any of their social habits or to change their clothing or anything like that. So it is a way to enter into Islam and in fact not have to change. And you can stay exactly the same way you were. These are some of the reasons, just some of the reasons why this movement is so strong in the United States and why it is, in fact, unfortunately gaining in popularity. Another reason is that if you look at the literature that's available about Islam in the United States, if you look at the leading so-called scholars who give lectures and give fiqh sessions and so forth in the United States, if you look at the institutions and organizations that exist in the United States, you'll find that almost all of them reflect this, not all of them, I make sure to say almost all of them, many of them, let me put it this way. Many of them, they reflect this kind of Asraniya movement and Asraniya thinking. For example, I will take different topics, and if you remember, those of you who were here last time, you'll see the same kind of arguments that we mentioned last time. For example, with respect to tafsir, what's the number 1 tafsir distributed throughout the United States? And English. Abdullah Yusuf Ali. What's number 2? I don't know what number 2 is, but one of the other popular ones is Muhammad Asad's tafsir. And if we look at these, and I think before in the mosque in Boulder I gave a lecture about which I discussed these. If you look, for example, to Yusuf Ali's tafsir, the most widespread tafsir in the United States. With respect to, for example, heaven and hell, Jannah wa Nar, he said in fact that there's no such thing as heaven and hell. And it is just a state of mind. And this is what we talked about last time in the Asraniya movement or the Aqlaniya movement that we talked about last time. And it denies those things that the mind cannot see or the mind cannot prove. We talked about that last time, that in fact there's some things that Aql has no realm or has no right discussing because it cannot prove it or cannot deny it. But for these people, Al-Aqlaniya and also Al-Aqlaniya movement, if Al-Aql can't prove it, then they deny it. For example, with respect to jinn, he also says that most likely the jinn were some foreign people, foreigners, not a separate creation, but just some foreign people. With respect to, and we mentioned that also, this Muhammad Abdu, we talked about his views on that. He said jinn are nowadays the microbes that they recently discovered. With respect to jihad, he said jihad or fighting is only permissible in self-defense. With respect to riba, he said, the modern day interest that you find in the banking system, this is not riba, this is halal. This doesn't fall under the principles of riba in the Qur'an. Similarly, one of the other popular tafsirs of the Qur'an is Muhammad Ali's tafsir. Muhammad Ali is a Qadiani, and his tafsir is filled with Qadiani ideas. But we'll leave that for that's another topic, the Qadiani movement. The other tafsir, which is unfortunately someone, I'm not sure who, but someone is distributing this tafsir throughout the United States. And I go to many mosques now and I find maybe 20 or 30 of them. This is the tafsir of Muhammad Asad. Well, Muhammad Asad, some of you may know him. He is originally from Austria, and he converted to Islam. His name used to be Leopold Weiss. And he wrote a book that was translated into Arabic. He wrote 2 books that were translated into Arabic. One is called The Road to Mecca, and the other one is called Islam at the Crossroads. And these 2 books were written early in his life, and they are actually good books. But later in his life, he completely changed his thought. Later in his life, he completely changed. Well, if you look at his tafsir, and you see exactly the Asraniya movement, actually almost exactly the Mu'tazila beliefs inside of his tafsir. For example, with respect to Allah, he said the only thing we can say about Allah, we cannot say what He is, we can only say what He isn't. And we cannot say that Allah even is existing. We can only say that He is not something. And this is a classic Mu'tazila approach. And he says, for example, the expressions in the Qur'an, for example, about Allah's anger, or ghadab, or His pleasure, or His love. He said, all of these don't mean anything. And he said, we cannot say that Allah has anger or pleasure, love. These things we cannot say about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he said, you have to ask yourself, when Muhammad has praise, what kind of God does he pray to? He's praying to a God that actually doesn't exist. It has no attributes, has no sifat, has no nothing. And if in this, unfortunately, as I said, this is one of the popular tafsirs. Also, with respect to the mu'jizat of the prophets or the miracles of the prophet, also he denies them flatly, to the point that he even says that the stories about the prophets of old are not true. They are just stories. Asatir al-awwaleen. He says that about the Qur'an. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that's what the kuffar says about the Qur'an, and he says it in his tafsir. He says, for example, he says about the story of Suleiman. He said because these stories were so deeply ingrained in the imagination of the people to whom the Qur'an addressed itself in the first instance, these legendary accounts of Solomon's wisdom and magic powers had acquired a cultural reality of their own, and therefore they were included in the Qur'an. In other words, he's saying that because they believed them at that time, Allah put them in the Qur'an. And as I said, this unfortunately, this tafsir, as I said, I don't know who, but it is by whom, but it is being spread throughout the United States. With respect to the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the number one selling and the biggest and the best looking seerah in English is Ismail Faruqi's translation. By the way, Ismail Faruqi is one of the leaders of the Asraniya movement, or was one of the leaders. Is his translation of Muhammad Hussein Haykal's Sirat Muhammad. Now, if you just take the name of that book in the Arabic language, is there something strange about the name of that book? And have you ever seen another book about the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ with that name? And it's not Hayat Muhammad Rasulullah, it's not even Hayat Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam or anything, but it's just Hayat Muhammad. And the reason that is, if you read the book, he's trying to make Muhammad look, he's trying to make the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ look like just any one of us. Nothing special about him. There was no mu'jizat. Hatta al-Isra wal-Mi'raj is just the dream that he saw. And he's trying to make the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and his knowledge look like just anything that we may possess. And giving us the right actually to look to his sunnah and say, as Abu Hanifa said about the people, the Tabi'een, they are rijal and we are rijal. Look to the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. He is a man and we are men. And unfortunately, I met many people in this country who have that way of thinking towards the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And in fact, the sunnah in the English literature and in the lectures that are given in the United States is probably the most, what can I say? The most degraded. It is treated like it is nothing. For example, Jamāl Badawi, in a lecture that he gave in the ISNA summer conference in Stanford about maybe 3 or 4 years ago, he tried to prove that most of the Sunnah is not Sharia. It's not part of the Sharia. And even those that are part of the Sharia, they're meant for very specific circumstances. Well, also he has shown in other occasions, he's the person who gives lots of fiqh sessions, and I'll come back to some of his fatawa when I talk about another topic. He is someone who has made lots of very strange statements about the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. One time when he gave a fatwa, and some people were discussing it with him, this fatwa based on a verse in the Qur'an that contradicts the hadith's explanation of the Qur'an, his answer was, sometimes the Qur'an is clear and we just have to throw the hadith away. This is one of the characteristics of the Aqlaniyya when we talk later about their methodology. And this is one of the ways by which they approach the Sunnah. Also in that lecture that he gave in Stanford, the problem, by the way, Jamāl Zarabozo, I met him, I know him. The problem with him is in ulum al-hadith we'll call him hatub al-layl. He just takes, he doesn't know. In that lecture about the Sunnah that he gave in Stanford 4 years ago, he recommended 2 books, and those 2 books say the exact opposite things about the Sunnah. And he said, if you want to know more about the Sunnah, I recommend you read these 2 books. And he's recommending them as if they are. But what he said in that lecture, a very interesting point, especially for those who took the Usul al-Fiqh class last year. He said the Prophet ﷺ made ijtihad sometimes. We discussed that point. And he was wrong sometimes. And he was not corrected. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not correct him. And if this is the case, then we can take any sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and say, well, maybe this is one of those that Allah forgot to correct, or I don't think he'll say forgot, but did not. Fazl al-Rahman also is one of the famous scholars of Islam in the United States. He taught for many years in the University of Chicago. He blatantly says, he agrees with the Mustashriqeen that most of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ are false, or fabricated. They are not authentic hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And now we move on to after 2 minutes. By the way, this one is on pause. I've done that before. We move on to the area of fiqh. Well, in the area of fiqh also, we find lots of strange fatwa that we hear. I'll just mention some of them. Some people, they say that there's no punishment for ridda. That there's no proof that there's any punishment for ridda. It's okay to buy a house on mortgage. Any kind of insurance is halal. And some even say any kind of interest is halal. You put your money in the bank and get interest, it's okay. There's some even more interesting ones. Like one person who said that it is okay for a woman who is menstruating, to pray nowadays. And his dalil, shaking his head, he agrees. His dalil for that is that during the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, they did not have anything to catch the blood and keep it from dripping in the mosque. So nowadays we have, so therefore it should be okay. He's forgetting this. If he's familiar with hadith, he'll know that the woman who's mustahada, and sometimes they used to pray in the mosque and they used to put a bowl underneath her to catch the blood when it drops. And this shows that the illah is not the blood dropping. That's not the illah of why the woman was menstruating. And also, unfortunately, one of the leaders of a large portion of Muslims in the United States, he says that it's okay for a Muslimah to marry a non-Muslim man. And in order to maybe prove that point, I guess, he married his daughter to a non-Muslim. Of course, we talked about last time that one of the areas of the Aqlaniyya, one of the areas that Muhammad Abdul talked a lot about, and Sayyid Ahmed Khan and the others, deals with the situation or the role of women in Islam. And this is where we find lots of interesting fatwa, lots of interesting things written. And unfortunately, one of the things that this movement, the Aqlaniyya movement, is claiming, and what they always spread, is that there's a big difference between cultural Islam, what Muslims do by culture, and what is part of Islam. In essence, that's okay, because there are some things which are culture and some things which are essential to Islam. But the problem is what falls into what. That's where the problem lies. And they like to put lots of things into culture and take it away from Islam, especially when it comes to women. For example, Kokab Siddiqui has written a couple of books about the liberation of women through Islam or something like this. Muhammad Zaid gave them to me. Muhammad Zaid Muskin was last year, he was trying to write some papers about women in Islam, and he ordered these two books by Kokab Siddiqui. He says, for example, and this goes also, by the way, into their methodology. He says, for example, the woman can be a ruler. Happen. And he says, and here's his proof, or here's what he said. He said, if anyone tells you no, he said, ask them for a hadith in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim from more than one Sahabi. Now the question itself, there's some problems with the question itself. And as I said, when we talk about their methodology, we can discuss the problems with that. But the problem is this same author, in the reference to that book, he references a book called Mishkat al-Muqtabih, which is a collection of hadith. And he says to the reader that you should read this book because many people, they just stick to Al-Bukhari and Muslim, and there's many other hadiths that we have to follow and believe. But when it comes to this question, he says, ask them for a hadith, and from Al-Bukhari and Muslim, and given from more than one Sahaba. He also says in that book that it is okay for a woman to be imam for the men in prayer. He says in that book that the hadith about the Prophet ﷺ said, because of the woman's obligation to her husband, if he were to ask anyone to prostrate to anyone, he would ask a woman to prostrate to her husband, which is the authentic hadith. He said this hadith is fabricated, and his dalil for that, again, this enters into methodology. His dalil for that is that those of you who took the hadith class, you know about that. He also says that regarding the face cover of the women, he said the face was not covered until at least 150 years after the Prophet's time. And then he says about women praying in the mosque. He said women should pray every prayer in the mosque. And he says in his book, even the women during the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he says they even used to pray Isha wal Fajr in the mosque. And they even used to pray Isha wal Fajr in the mosque. If you go to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, what will you find? And they only used to pray Isha wal Fajr because during that time they could not be recognized by the people. That's what the hadith says. That's what the wife of the Prophet ﷺ clearly says, that we used to go just to Isha wal Fajr because at that time we could not be recognized by the people. They could not see us. What does he say? Even Isha wal Fajr they used to go to. And implying that, the other prayers obviously you must go to. Well, he takes the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, in which the woman is ordered to pray, or is told, the woman was told that it's best for her to pray in her house, and in fact in a small compartment in her house. He said that the reason this woman, I don't know where, I have no idea where he brought this from, and he has no footnote giving any evidence for this. He said the reason that woman was told to pray in her house is because she didn't have decent clothing to go outside her house. So therefore, we cannot use this hadith as dalil. This is one of the characteristics of the Al-Aqlaniyya movement. That they come up with reasons for hadith or for verses of the Qur'an and say, well, that reason doesn't exist anymore, or it's not general and so forth. With respect to women's affairs also, we find Jamāl Badawi also following the same pattern. Jamāl Badawi, for example, he says now, this is the way he said it. He said there is recent evidence showing that when the Prophet ﷺ married Aisha, she was about 18 or 19 years old. First of all, this point isn't very important, except for the fact that non-Muslims, in particular the West, may not like the fact that Aisha was married to the Prophet ﷺ when she was very young. Even though it's something mutawatir, something well known in the history of Islam, and he cannot accept it. And therefore he says, there is recent evidence, I don't know what recent evidence there can be, to show that Aisha was 18 or 19 before she married the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. With respect to the hadith of Abu Bakr, and the fact that the Prophet ﷺ saying that no people will prosper if their ruler is a woman, he says, first of all, this was in a lecture to non-Muslims and Muslims about the position of women in Islam. He said, first of all, Abu Bakr, according to the scholars of hadith, is not acceptable as a narrator. According to the scholars of hadith, Abu Bakr, if you know Abu Bakr, Abu Bakr is one of the Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ. And if you look, as I did, I went through 15 books from the scholars of Hadith discussing Abu Bakr. Not one of them said he is not acceptable narrator. And in fact, we know that according to the scholars of Hadith, all of the Sahaba are adil. Well, also, showing his Asraniya reflection, he also says about this Hadith, that if you look to, for example, India under Indira Gandhi and England under Margaret Thatcher, he says this shows that women can rule and the people will have falah. So therefore, this Hadith must be not true. We'll come back to that when we talk again about their methodology and premises. With respect to also polygamy in Islam or marrying more than one wife, he said it is forbidden except under very specific circumstances. Like, for example, the wife cannot have any children. Therefore, you can marry a second wife. And the problem with that is that, and by the way, this is the same thing that Muhammad Abdul said and the other people before that we talked about last time. And the problem with that is he's bringing some conditions that you do not find in the Qur'an, you do not find in the Hadith of Muhammad. With respect to, for example, covering the face of the woman, whether you believe that the woman is obliged to cover the face or not, and whether you believe it or not, you cannot deny that it is something that existed during the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and something that he approved of. So it is a sunnah, it is an acceptable act in Islam, whether or not you believe it is obligatory or not. And to make fun of any sunnah, to make fun of any part of the deen actually is a part of kufr. Well, he has on many occasions ridiculed those people who wear face covering and saying that in fact it is not part of Islam and so forth. And just to give another example, the Mu'tazila of old, they were famous for one thing. One of their 5 points is the Lamad bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar, ordering good and eradicating evil, which meant what to them means use force to make sure that people follow your opinions. And that's what we find anytime any of the Khalifa were from the Mu'tazila, as for example during the time of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, they use force to force people to follow their opinion. Well, it's not exactly force, but Jamāl Zarabozo went to one mosque to give a lecture, and the mosque has 2 floors, the women upstairs and the men downstairs. And he refused to give a lecture. He refused to give his lecture until the women were told to come downstairs and sit with the men. Now the point is, whether you accept the fact that men and women can sit together in the mosque, that doesn't matter. But why should you insist? Can you say that the women sitting upstairs, this is something haram, or this is munkar that you have to object to? And you see this among al-Asraniya, that they also try to enforce their opinions in a similar way that the Mu'tazila before did. Also, Ismail Faruqi's wife wrote a book about women in Islam, and unfortunately this book was published in that book. And by the way, in the back of the book they show a picture of her wearing something, I guess she calls it hijab. She says, for example, that the Qur'an specifically called for equal rights for both men and women in divorce. And if you go to the Qur'an, I know what verse she's basing this on. And this is when we talk about methodology, we'll talk about how they take a general verse, or if we're Hanafi, the Hanafi in Usul al-Fiqh, they call it a verse which is Zahir, which has a meaning which is open to many, or has a meaning which is open to many interpretations, and they prefer that verse over a verse which is mufassir, or which is more explained and more detailed, which is of course the exact opposite of what Usul al-Fiqh says that should do. With respect to, for example, the verse in the Qur'an about what women should wear, and it says إِلَّا مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا, she says that this command in the Qur'an signifies recommending a conformance with the prevailing customs of a region or period, and says nothing about a necessity for the veil or for all enveloping wraps that left only the hands exposed. Basically she's saying is that according to this verse, no matter what the women are wearing, and even if it's mini skirts up to here and topless, she says this verse says it's okay. Because the verse is just saying you should wear what is customary among the people. Also she praised Qasim Amin as someone who, and we talked about him last time briefly, someone who is emancipating women from Islamic point of view. And here's an argument that Abu Saud might like. She talks about who was the first, to show you how far, like the feminists in the United States. And the feminists go way beyond any logical, you cannot logically argue for what they're saying in any way. Unfortunately, she seems to be influenced by that, because she talks about the word nafs. She said Allah, the first human being, Allah describes it as nafs. And she said nafs is a feminine word. But for some reason, because of the influence of the Old Testament, Israeliyat, she says, the Muslim scholar says the first human was a man. Even though nafs is feminine, so therefore, it should have been a woman. And she forgets the verse in Surah Al-Imran, which says that Isa, the similitude of Isa in Allah's sight, is the same as Adam, or also the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad. As I mentioned earlier, to try to wrap up, as I mentioned earlier, unfortunately they have institutions, they have organizations, they have lots of money. Unfortunately they're very organized, and unfortunately they're very good at what they're doing. And spreading this way of looking at Islam, they spread it through different ways. They spread it, for example, through their magazines. They spread it through their TV shows. Just to give one example, and one of the magazines that comes from the Islamic Center of Southern California, which is, I believe, it is the contributing editors or the scholar at hand or whatever, or the advisors are Mahar Hatwood and Fatih Uthman. And first of all, in the recent issues of this magazine, it's called The Minaret, coming from the Islamic Society of Southern California. In every one of the recent issues, they have to show a woman, a successful Muslim woman, who they describe without hijab. They have to. For example, in one case, they brought the woman, and they said, mashallah, and they talked so nice about her, and she does word processing, and therefore she can work at home. She can work at home, that's good. That means she's not going to have any problem wearing hijab and so forth. And they show a picture of her without hijab. In the next issue, they talk about Muslims graduating from college, and they show a Muslim woman without hijab. And they're showing successful, quote-unquote, successful Muslim women, that if our Muslim youth see these women, they're going to think or try to be similar to them. They also have a TV show, which they call Islam on the Air. Right? It's produced by the same people. This is the Minaret. They put a picture from this TV show. This is their TV show, presumably, spreading Islam. Yeah. The Minaret. And this program that they have, they show on TV, unfortunately, they're spreading it throughout the entire United States, and it is representing their version of Islam, or the Asaniya movement. But even you can see from the Al-Asaniya movement, or the people who follow this, there's no question that the host of the show is going to have to be a woman. That's given. Not only is she going to have to be a woman, but of course she's going to have to wear as much makeup as she can, to compete with, I guess, Tammy Faye Baker. This is the example that they take. But inside they show other pictures from the TV show, and I don't think you can see it very well. But here are a bunch of men and women sitting together. Some of the women are not, and even their dresses don't go all the way down to the floor. They are sitting together or standing together, practically arm to arm, and you can see that in fact they are touching. Men and women touching each other. And they don't seem to have any problem with that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks to the Muslim women not to speak to men in such a way, in a flirtatious way. And this is actually talking to a non-Muslim here, interviewing a priest, and they're laughing together. And here's another meeting of a number of women, the dress that the women are wearing hardly goes below the knees. And here, as I said, you probably not seen very well from where you're sitting. And this TV show, which as I said, they are spreading throughout the United States, this is what they're claiming is Islam. And not just these pictures, these are minor things, but the thought that they're giving also are the type of things that I've been talking about today. So if you look at the institutions, if you look at the even some of the conventions, sometimes are dominated by people of this way of thinking. And if you look at the literature which is available, including this magazine, which is one of the quality-wise, it looks like one of the best, unfortunately, of the magazines that are available. And if you consider all of these factors, you will realize why Al-Asraniya movement is very strong, as well as the other fact that I mentioned is, unfortunately, the few scholars that are, or we have very few scholars that could refute them, and some of those, even who could refute them, do not refute them. And plus, this is a very easy brand of Islam. But as we'll talk about later, unfortunately, it is a very easy brand of Islam. But the question is how much, where do you draw the line between actually the person who is following this madhab is within the realm of Islam or not. Well, I think, inshallah, with that, I will end the talk and open the floor for comments or suggestions. Now remember, we're not finished. So there's lots of aspects that we have not discussed today. Now I'm just presenting some of their views and some of their influence in the United States. Well, the other aspects about their methodology or their premises and some of their points, and quoting them in detail and discussing these points in detail. Inshallah, those will be in the future, inshallah. I hope it's not this question.
I'll say as much as I can because I won't be here.
I will not be here next week either.
And second thing, I think this is my personal opinion. It's not from the Islamic, European Islamic movement. So nobody should quote what I say to the European jihad. But actually what Brother Jamāl was saying is not only in America, I have seen it in part of the Islamic world that is lived by the modern so-called. And as you see in any group with Da'wah, the person changes his way of life. Even born Muslim, you will see a difference in his life once he accepts Islam or not. Once he accepts Sunnah and Ibadah. But in this country, which is led by Modernist, you will never see, there is not a problem for him to come from A to B. He will say the way he wants, he can talk to the girl, and whatever he was doing is okay. He will be just a member of that. Unfortunately, it's not only in America, also some of the countries. This is nothing. The other point, unfortunately, they are harming our new Muslim brothers from the States, because they will come with open heart and they want to accept Islam as a whole life, change their name, but they don't change their name. So you will see many brothers who accept Islam, they will stay with their old name. Not only the way they look, but even their names, they don't have the opportunity to change their name. This is very hard. About this, because I'm from California, Southern California, unfortunately,
from the home,
yeah.
One of the two centers.
I don't think they are alone. I think I can say some enemies of Allah, they are behind us, especially the Muslims. First of all, where do they get this online? I think I can go to that extent. Now the problem is because of their media, as you mentioned, this TV show, they say they sell it, but I think they are giving it for free to other Islamic centers. But to be very fair, I think we can group this into three groups. Like this Islamic center is nowhere from the modern. It's way beyond that.
They are leading the charge.
Leading. Like Kawkab Siddiq also is another unity, or whatever you call it. I mean, he doesn't base his Islamic writing anywhere of a hadith or any understanding. So that's another group. Now, the last question is, where does ethnic Islam stand? I know some of these are very active members, but because now a certain group are very leading, even personally, you think of them as behind. You're aware that some of the people you mentioned, they are the best. And I unfortunately, or whatever, I was present this year, and this was my first year attending it. I was not really happy and shocked at that. But they are not the same group. So when you speak as an organization.
And actually I could tell you some stories about that mosque, which it is in a better situation now than it was some time ago. As you said, the amount of money that they have and other things, and it seems very strange. And the problem with ISNA has many branches. Okay? For example, ATP is part of ISNA, the American Trust Publications. American Trust Publications are the ones who published Yusuf Ali's old tafsir. They are the ones who published Mrs. Farouqi's book and made it, they tried to spread it as one of the best books available. They are the ones who published Jamāl Badawi's small pamphlets, in which he mentioned some of the things that I mentioned here. They are also, they were even going to publish, if you know Karima Omar, they were going to publish a book by Karima Omar. Karima Omar is beyond Fatih Uthman. Like, alhamdulillah, just before they published it, she joined Rashid Khalifa's group, so they decided not to publish it. So from that aspect, they are to blame just as much as anyone else. With respect to the conventions also, some of their conventions have been completely dominated by scholars, such as these. For example, Hassan Turabi has been invited many times. Last year, Muhammad al-Ghazali was invited. Even beyond that, they invite Mustashriqeen. Jana Staziro, almost always invited to come and speak. But the problem with ISNA is that they have never taken a stand on what they believe as Islam. And they don't believe to do so. They want to be an umbrella organization taking any Muslims. Okay. I've discussed this with Ahmed Zaki, the president before him, Qutb al-Mahdi, and many other in the past, and other people who worked there, such as Dawood Zwing. And they will not take a stand. In the late 70s, when there was a big dispute between Sunni and Shia, they will never come out and say, well, the Shia believe this and Sunnis believe this. They're not willing to do that. And if they do the same thing with respect to the Afraniya movement, and in fact they are not saying anything about the Afraniya movement, and as you said, they are, if the Afraniya movement infiltrates them or publishes through them or lectures through them, they do not do anything. And they may not be the leaders, but they are to blame in the sense that they are not doing anything about it. For example, you'll never hear a speech at an ISNA convention, someone standing up refuting any of these things that I said. And they don't believe in that. They don't believe in that because they want to be an umbrella organization. This is their theory. This is what they think. By doing this, they'll do the best for Islam. But unfortunately, I don't think so.
ما سمعنا شيء عن معهد الفكر العالمي صاحب العنوان.
أيوة.
ما سمعنا شيء.
I told you there are two headquarters for them. One of them is in the west coast, the other one is in the east coast. Ismail Farouqi was one of the founders of the IIIT, along with Taha Jaber's wife, actually, was one of the founders. And next time, I'll talk about some of their people and some of their thoughts, like Abdul Hamid Abu Sulaiman, who unfortunately now is the head of the Islamic University in Malaysia, and some of their writings also. But they are one of the leaders. They are more the ideological leader, while these people put it into practice. Not this brother.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You mentioned about and I think quite a number of Muslim scholars, they are aware of the deficient things, you can say, or shortcomings. But my question is, if you want to distribute the tafsir, do you have any alternatives for that?
Yes. Actually, as you mentioned, many scholars are aware of the shortcomings, and so there's been now 2 revised editions. And both of them, alhamdulillah, are much better than the old one. So you have now, alhamdulillah, the revised edition.
So they are not distributing revised edition?
Yes, yes. Yani, for example, ATP now has now published a revised edition. They are distributing it. And also there's another revised edition that Jafar Sheikh Idris worked on, and it is being distributed by many people. So alhamdulillah, this problem, inshallah, at least part of it will be solved.
How about the one distributed by this?
The big, yeah, this is one of the, this is the revised one that Jafar Sheikh Idris worked on.
It doesn't say revised by Jafar.
No, it was a group, and it wasn't just Jafar. Jafar said, I'm very happy they didn't put my name because I don't want to be responsible for it. Sheikh Jafar.
I have some comments. You know, I'm really surprised and shocked by what I heard, especially from a person who spent a big part of his Dawah time within member and an active member responsible for different state entities. And if a person likes to look at any kind of organization, of course we can pick a lot. Like while we're here, there's a lot of other universities in the world, in the Muslim world, that we can go. Why did we choose the United States? Number 1 enemy to the Muslims to come and study here. What's the reason? One of the main reasons because what they have as an education system may be good. You don't care about, whether. But the idea is usually as Muslim and as Da'iyah, we always like to, we go to school, we sit with women. I don't think any one of you here will go and talk to women or sit with women in the class and then we call this a necessity. It's, the idea is we have to be very specific by what we are, what we need. If we want to act Muslim, we should act Muslim all the time, in every aspect. We should understand Islam and let our heart, through our belief, let our behavior take over. But the idea of saying that this has had this mistake and this has had this mistake. I remember hearing one of the lectures you gave one way back, talking about Jamāl Zarabozo saying he's one of the best scholars. If you take his book out of the shelf, you will not have enough book to read.
Excuse me, Abdul
No,
I can assure you that I never said that about Jamāl Zarabozo, especially since coming to Boulder.
No.
I can assure you I never said that about
The
Jamāl
lecture
Zarabozo.
that you gave in Islam, one. And I have
Talking about bring the tape.
You were asked about what are the Muslim people that a Muslim enter Islam. Where does he refer to? You told him the taste of Jamāl Zarabozo and stuff like that. Suddenly now Jamāl Zarabozo is something that...
Okay, this is not in Boulder. This could have been a long time ago before number 1 Jamāl Zarabozo changed, and before I changed my opinion about it. And you have to consider this. Don't say it was in Boulder, because the last 5 years I've been here, I can assure you I never said such a thing about Jamāl Zarabozo.
No, I didn't say in Boulder.
No, you did say that. You did say that.
I heard it say. I heard it say that was... maybe I heard it here, but the idea is, why does that mean that we can change our ideology, our thinking, and the way we look into Muslims? Is it to how we feel, or is it that how the time of the Prophet ﷺ used to do? You take the behavior of a Muslim and compare it to certain things. It seems to be that we're sitting here instead of learning something, we're basically making riba about other people that they are not here to defend themselves, or about something. What could we learn, or what can we learn about it? The message of this mosque is to teach us something that we can use in our life as Muslims, and not to kind of like make it every alim. I have a question. Every one of us has been here at period of time. Whoever brought one masjid to the mosque, one Muslim to the mosque? Whoever read an Islamic book in English? We never do that. For people who sit down and write this Qur'an, and spend half of their life writing the Qur'an, and we come here, we ask, what is the best translation for the Quran? They told us Muhammad Yusuf Ali. And suddenly, here we are sitting. We are not people qualified as a Muslim to sit down and put a person down like Muhammad Yusuf Ali. I don't think we're qualified. What did we put to Islam? We didn't put anything. How many persons became Muslim in our hands? Nothing. How many papers did we write on Islam? 0. So how can we sit down and we look at scholars that they left their country and they tried to stay here, put all their da'wah, their number of Muslims became Muslim in their hands, number. My wife is Muslim, she will never listen to any person but except you, Jamāl Zarabozo. Because what he said makes sense, used to maybe, I don't know. But the idea is, we have to be in a position where we can sit down and say, this is wrong, this is bad, and this is not acceptable, this is acceptable as Muslim. Otherwise, it's ghibah. Allahu A'lam, maybe I mean. And that's what my opinion. This, we would like to make those lectures more directed towards something that you can learn, something you can apply in our life as da'iyah involved in American society. And since you are one of the Muslims here, we'd like you to tell us something like that. This is my interest. I was sitting here and I was shocked. I never heard a lecture like that before from you. I mean, that's what I have to say. Just to make it clear for the brother that those people, this is Jamāl Badawi, Al-Qaradawi. Once I was in Islam, and Yusuf al-Qaradawi, he saw the woman sitting up there. He said, isn't that an educational place? Aren't we here to learn Islam? Why are the women sitting all the way as if I'm going to eat them if they drink? And Yusuf al-Qaradawi, I don't think anyone doesn't know Yusuf al-Qaradawi and his effort in Islam and his sacrifice and his knowledge. He's a scholar.
To change the lot of thinking, the woman thing.
Would you like me to comment?
We want to say this.
Well, you see, the man is not here. I don't know what he did recently. If you want to comment, you can comment on a tape you sent to Yusuf al-Qaradawi and let him answer that. You see, what's really strange is Yusuf al-Qaradawi was here last year. And we did, and 4,500 people from the Muslims was there, and no one question was asked against something he did or against his behavior.
And when he brought the women into the men's section, you think people did not tell him?
Well, he tell him that, yeah, what did he tell him?
I left before that, but I know, for example, Abu Wais, I don't want to get into an emotional argument, but the Asraniya movement.
What is Asraniya? Define Asraniya movement. I don't understand. If you say
because you weren't here last time, and you came late last time, you came late today. And while you're here, you're busy. So don't blame us if we didn't define the Asraniya movement.
I have my excuse.
So don't blame me though. Don't yell and say what's the Asraniya movement.
And suddenly you start attacking big da'iyah that we know that, what is Asraniya? What do you exactly define Asraniya? And I think this is something basic. If you start any lecture, you should define it. I think you should define what is Asraniya exactly.
Okay, who can the Asraniya movement is a very dangerous movement because it's able to fool many people. Because some of the people now who are joining it are people who are well respected, okay, and who should refute them. Do you think I haven't sat down with Jamāl Badawi and discussed some of these issues? I sat down face to face with him, and he said to me, "Wallah," he said that I will change this. And his thing on polygamy, he said, "I will change this." Not only did he not change it, I heard him a week later saying exactly the same thing. And we cannot just say, go to Jamāl Badawi and talk to him, because we go to him and he continues. There has to come a time that we have to speak. Okay? And then now you said, who should speak? Someone who writes. Someone who does this. You yourself said, I was an active member in ISNA. I was a member of Majlis al-Shura. I translated Fiqh Sunnah for them. I've written lots of things. Like, so what's your point?
What's the idea? You move?
And also, if I make a mistake in my writing, I expect someone to correct me. That's the way of a Muslim. And if I make a mistake, someone should come to me and say, this is wrong. What you wrote here was wrong.
Yeah, we know those people as a very good scholar, very people that put that. I can bring Jamāl Badawi. I can call Jamāl Badawi and ask him to come over here next week if you want. I can beg him to come here, and maybe you can sit down with him and then do some kind of let the guy decide for himself, because it seems that you know everything about Jamāl Badawi that we don't know. And
well, I have lots of experience with Jamāl Badawi. Okay, when I speak, I'm speaking on my experience, what I've seen, what I've read, what I've discussed with these people. But the point is that if we like someone, as I mentioned last time in the introduction to the lecture, I mentioned some very important points. One of the points is we are not judging these people's intentions. I talked about the Mu'tazila. I said some of them, their intention was to save Islam. And from the writings it seems that their intention was to save Islam. Fazl Rahman, one of the most extreme of the modernists. And if you write about why he took the modernist position in his what he wrote about himself, My Belief in Action, if you believe what he's saying, his goal 100% is trying to save Islam. Because he thinks that if we don't change Islam, it's going to be destroyed. So first of all, I'm not talking about their intention. Secondly, if someone does something which is good, this doesn't mean that we have to sit and be quiet about the bad that he does if that bad has the bad effect. We have to do something about it. We cannot just sit quietly. And I discussed with Al-Qasibi before whether I should name people or not name people. I've given these lectures many times now. Sometimes I don't name anyone who's involved. But if I don't name anyone who's involved, what I found is these people continue their influence increases. And if the person doesn't know I'm talking about, for example, Jamāl Badawi, he just goes right back to Jamāl Badawi's books. And there's other things that I didn't mention. And we have to be aware of these people. And this approach, that we are just silent, and this is ghiba. This is the same thing that the Sufis said to the scholars of Hadith, that when you make Jarh wa Ta'deel, this is ghiba. If you're doing it for the sake of Islam, to point out the mistakes of these scholars so that we can be aware of them.
Why don't you write a book and answer it? He writes a book.
Write a book? What's the difference between writing a book and a lecture? You want me to write a book and give it to 5,000 people instead of lecturing to 20 people?
No,
you think that's better?
He didn't come to all the Muslims in the United States and told them certain things. You are telling us.
I've told you I've discussed these things with him. And in fact, in one of my lectures, I was refuting him. And what he did is he just walked out. He had a chance to stand up and say whatever he wanted to. He just walked out. And so, the point is, I understand your point. We should give everyone the benefit of a doubt. These are all our brothers. If they're doing work for Islam, we have to appreciate their work. And if they are making minor mistakes, we should be quiet about it. But if they are not...
When you see your brother making a mistake, you say to his brother.
طيب. طيب.
When he's not making nothing to his brother is not here. He's telling us I told the people that they are scholars, that we know about their activity. They are good Muslims. And if there's any doubt in anyone's mind, right now, you're telling everybody here that Islam is nothing. And if you take Islam from the Islamic activity in the United States, you don't have involved.
I didn't say Islam is nothing. I said Islam has a theory. I said Islam has... Yeah, as you know, I used to be in Majlis al-Shura.
Yeah, but that's
as you know,
hurting me. Because you used to be one of them, you got out, and now you basically...
What did I say about Islam? I said the problem with Islam is that they have the idea that they should encompass everyone and not criticize anyone. And unfortunately, through their publications and through their conventions, they are giving these people a field to talk. And they are not saying anything about it.
No, I am exactly. I just want the brother. Most of them are new here. Islam is something. The Rabta is part of Islam. Our Islamic society here.
I mentioned this fact also that Islam has many branches. For example, I talked about ATP. The point is that sometimes we have to point out some mistakes. Sometimes we have to. This Asraniya movement is probably the strongest movement in the United States right now. Thanks to the money and the productions of these people, of the TV show that they're putting out, and of people who unfortunately are spreading their ideas. Whether they know it or not, they are spreading their ideas. It is the largest movement right now, and we have to be aware of it. We have to understand what they're saying, we have to understand what they're basing it on, and we have to be able to show the Muslims where they're wrong. And this is now the second step. We have to see what's their influence, which is what I tried to do today. Had you been here earlier, I defined what are the different steps that we'll be taking in this
I was getting
series
for
of lectures.
the brother.
Okay.
To get going for the brother.
So don't criticize me.
No,
Don't be mad with me. And probably it's best even not to comment if you comment about something that's.
I'm mad with something.
I think you are mad with me.
No, not with you. It's all the thing that you said about other brother. That's all. Like Allah care. No, I don't get that.
I talked with Brother Jamāl twice based and sometimes privately. I trust him very much, and I think what he's talking about in this lecture and in the previous lecture, we really have to do that, because I also came from a background where you have to show the right from the bad. If you don't do that, then these people will come and ruin Islam, basically. Because, I mean, we are not going to sit down. Actually, I was going to ask him how are we going to fight them in terms of, because, no, they are spreading very bad ideas, and that's no good. I mean, you have to fight them. If you don't fight them, they are going to turn the Islamic movement somewhere that they are going to be lost. I've seen that in my country, and I've seen that in other people too. When they are affected by those leaders, that sometimes maybe they were good, and then they changed over time. And now you have to point out that. I mean, some authors of some good books, I'm not going to name anybody right now, but they were good and now they changed. And I read about them, and now you have to be careful. I mean, we don't have to be dumb about it. We have to be very intelligent, and we are educated people, so we have to make a judgment. And I mean, we cannot just take any leader or author in Islam and just take his word for granted. We have to judge how. Not just by ourselves, but also by maybe listening to that or reading from other books and then make our judgment. And also we have to clear that to other Muslims. That does not mean that once we hear something that we make a judgment right away. We have to maybe study it, maybe we have to ask, maybe we have to go back and teach ourselves how to maybe judge these things. But we really have to study that.
And he has fun with his minhaj actually. And if it was just some points of whether you have to make wudu from this or not, and I'm not going to even mention it. But when he gets to the point, for example, of saying that there's some sunnah that the Prophet ﷺ made ijtihad, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not correct it.
That's the problem, having often believing that. Only Jamāl doesn't say something like that. He's Shafi. We will send the statement to him and let him comment and say that.
I don't know about this code of conduct, but there are some points in Islam that can have different interpretations. People can have different ijtihadat. And I think it becomes dangerous when you equalize all these scholars at the same level. Like somebody who has different view on women's rights, or somebody who thinks that jinn are micro, whether there is no Jannah or not. They are not all the same.
The مشكلة is the minhaj. His methodology. As I mentioned earlier, there's 4 ways to make mistakes. We will discuss, if he has wrong intention, he's not sincerely seeking the truth. And I did not say that for any of these people. But I said if their premises or their philosophy or their basic assumptions are wrong, or if their methodology is wrong, or they are missing some detailed evidence related to the problem. If the methodology is wrong, okay, or the basic assumptions are wrong, this is a big thing, especially if the person is someone as influential, and as the brother said, I can find you many women, especially women, they will not listen to anyone except Jamāl Zarabozo. In this summer conference, the women were upstairs, the men were downstairs. And the brother, the brother who was in charge, they kept insisting that they want to sit downstairs with the men. Some of them, of course, not all of them. Well, Jamāl Zarabozo is coming from the airport. He hasn't even arrived. He's turning about 2 blocks away, just a few minutes away. And somehow they know. They said, Jamāl Zarabozo is coming now. Ask him if we can sit downstairs. If he has that much influence, then if he's doing something wrong, it becomes even that more important to point out his mistakes. if he had no influence, if what he was doing didn't matter, and then we bring up and say, let's talk about this guy, then you can say, what Jamāl doing, he's just wasting our time. He's making riba and he's trying to attack that guy. But what we're trying to do is defend Islam. And as Brother Ali said, there's something which they're clear, there are some things which have different opinions. But if the minhaj goes against the minhaj of the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, which is one of the lectures that I said we'll talk about, the minhaj of the Asraniyah as compared to the minhaj of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, when it comes to this point where the minhaj is wrong, then actually they are from Ahl Bid'ah. Actually. You can't avoid saying that.
Well, there are some of them very extreme according to
yeah, certainly.
I would say kufr. Saying that Muhammad this is
less than. For example, Sayyid Ahmed Khan, he said that revelation is similar to the hallucinations that the crazy people have.
So what do you call that?
Should we say that we shouldn't say anything about it? And say that the good man, let's be quiet?
You don't know Ahmed Khan. I don't know Ahmed Khan.
But okay, he's dead, so we cannot talk to him. So does that mean we can't say anything? Abdullah Yusuf Ali is dead. If we distribute his Qur'an everywhere, does that mean that, okay, he's dead, we can't talk to him, so therefore we shouldn't say anything?
You are giving the big Muslims this Qur'an. You gave me some Qur'an to give some people that they're saying Qur'an.
The revised edition.
Like the revised edition, which means it's what good that people have, and what makes the people know about the good thing that people have. Why should we consider? As if we are, purified.
Okay, this is one of the mistakes in Amr al-Ma'ruf and Nahy al-Munkar. And it was a very big mistake to think that you cannot stop someone's munkar until you are perfect. You cannot criticize someone until you are perfect.
I'm not saying it's perfect.
Well,
you have been
you're implying perfect. You are saying I have mistakes, so therefore I shouldn't say anything. There will never be any khutbah in the world in that case.
Let me point out one thing. There is a very important point that every Muslim should understand is Islam does not equal to Muslim. If a Muslim commits a mistake or made a mistake, that does not mean that Islam is. They should make a separation. So we should point out if somebody in a good place that makes a judgment, about these persons. We cannot talk about people without knowledge, that's for sure. But if you know something about somebody, and you are sure about that he's definitely wrong, then why should
and these quotes that I gave you today, are they quotes that you can say في اختلاف, maybe we can accept them or not, or are they very clear? For example, Mrs. Al-Faruqi saying that the verse in the Qur'an إلا ما ظهر منها means that the woman should wear whatever is normal in her environment. Is there any Muslim who says that? Any Muslim scholar who says that? Means if the environment everyone wears miniskirt or bikini, that means the Muslim woman is allowed to wear bikini because that's what هذا ما ظهر منها. And who says such a thing? I'm taking extreme quotes actually. If I were taking things which are doubtful, maybe you can say this is your opinion, this is your madam, and so forth. But I am taking extreme quotes. With respect to Muhammad Abdullah Khan, also I took his extreme quotes. I didn't take those which we could argue about.
Okay, so
بالنسبة مع المحاضرة الذين يتبنى الأسئلة بعد المحاضرة واحد أقل شيء نكون محترمين مشايخنا علماءنا الذين أمامنا اللي يتعبون من أجلنا ويحضرون ويأتون لنا بالمواضيع ملخصة لنا وبعد ذلك نحن نتحامل عليهم ونتهمهم باتهامات عجيبة لا نحسن الظن فيهم ونظن أنهم يتكلمون من غير ناصر.
خلي هذا الكلام بعدين إن شاء الله. واضح كلام الله حفظ. هذا خلاص. جزاك الله
قلنا أنت يا حبيبي.
ما لاحظنا هذا.
يعني لو نبغى أسئلة أحسن.
يعرف لماذا نتكلم معنا.
هذه سننتهي لما الشريعة
إن شاء الله. قضية مثل الصاروخ اللي ذكرتها الانفايرمنت، أنا سمعت من الشيخ قال إنه السنة ليس لبس الجداد وإنما تلبس لباس أهل البلد.
فهل معنى environment التي ذكرتها لا تعني هذا المعنى أو قصدت هذا المعنى أو هناك يعني أمور أخرى دلت على أن المعنى الذي قصدته تلبس السكين أو أمور أخرى؟
يعني did you hear the whole quote? Were you here when I read the quote?
أنا بعلق على الكلام.
يعني during the muhadra I read the whole quote, and she's saying that the Quran doesn't say any limit to how much you should wear, and it's completely determined. And if she said, for example, that you have to cover what the Quran says to cover, and then you may wear whatever is in the environment, that's something else. But that's not what she said. And she said that there's no limit to what has to be covered, and whatever is in the environment, this is what you.
ذكرت بعض العلماء أو بعض الدعاة في أمطار عربية ومناطق مختلفة، وذكرت اسماء منها رأس غنوشي وحسن ترابي وطربال وغيرها، وانت تعلق عليها في المحاضرة القادمة. فاللي أقول إذا انتخبنا هؤلاء مثلا في تونس وفي الجزائر وفي مصر وانتخبنا العلماء والدعاة الذين يعملون، فمن لأهل تونس وأهل الجزائر ما هو الإسلام الصحيح الذي يتبعونه؟ أين المسلمين الذين يقدمون الإسلام الصحيح الواضح لهؤلاء حتى يتبعونه إذا كان هؤلاء على خطأ؟ فنحن نلتقط ناس لهم رصيد ولهم باع طويل في العمل للإسلام، فكيف بأتباع هؤلاء ماذا يفعلون إذا سمعوا أو عرفوا بأن لديهم هذه الأخطاء الكبيرة كما ذكرت؟
If they are in a situation, for example, they're in a specific country, and there's only one group working for Islam. Well, this group has some mistakes, but it's better than everyone else is against Islam. And then this person has to decide whether it's his obligation to work for this group, given its mistakes, work for it, and inside it try to make nasiha to them. That's another issue. It's not exactly what we're discussing, but that's very possible. That people will be joining this group because this is the only group working for Islam, and it is better than all the other groups. But at the same time, they have the intention that if they can change it from within, they will change it.